Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Salamun alaikum and a good day to all of you. At the outset, I would like to take this opportunity, or I would say we would like to take this opportunity to personally express our gratitude to GCash for providing bank to the bankless Filipinos, providing the investment platform to our countrymen who have rare opportunity to invest their saved money. As to as to my reaction to the presentation, actually I have nothing to add because the presentation is comprehensive enough, although it is concise because of the time constraint that we have. Anyway, I will highlight just 2 points. First is the issue of riba, or usury as we know it. And the second one is the market potentials. And then after that, I will make my concluding remarks. Now, as we have heard in the presentation, that actually when we talk about Islamic finance, it is at least a 1 semester course. So for those of us who are uninitiated on the topic, we always introduce Islamic Finance 101 with the 3 U's, meaning the basic Islamic principles that differentiate Islamic finance from the conventional one. One, the first U is usury, that is riba. And the second one is, as also mentioned in the presentation, it's uncertainty and high risk, or what we call as gharar. The term or the contract or the transaction must be free from all shades of uncertainty and risk. And the third one is that any transaction or contract must not be associated with anything that is deemed haram in Islam, or unlawful, or what we call as prohibited. So as our Islamic Finance 101, just remember the 3 U's. Usury for riba, uncertainty for gharar, and unlawful or haram. Now, usually, as we have said, when we talk about Islamic finance, the usual attachment with that is it's against usury or riba. When we say usury or riba, we are simply referring to the practice of charging excessive or unfair interest on loans. Now, the question is this attitude toward usury or riba a monopoly of Islam? Meaning that other faith traditions don't have similar attitude toward it? The answer is that Abrahamic religious texts contain not only implicit but explicit teachings against usury. And we could even dare to say that religious texts emphasize justice, compassion, and fairness in financial dealings. If we take a look at Judeo-Christian scriptures, we can see that there are at least 8 passages that explicitly condemn or speak against the practice of usury. We can see in Exodus 22:25, prohibiting charging interest to the poor, in a passage in Leviticus prohibiting taking interest or profit from loans given to the needy. Another in Deuteronomy instructing not to charge interest on loans to fellow Israelites. In Nehemiah, describing Nehemiah's rebuke of the nobles and officials for charging interest. In a passage in Psalm, recommending a person who does not lend money with interest. And then in Proverbs, warns that accumulating wealth through interest may ultimately benefit the poor instead. And in Ezekiel, there is a criticism of those who engage in usury. And of course, another passage in Ezekiel in 18:13, it declares severe consequences for those who lend with interest. So these passages are clearly explicit in prohibiting or discouraging the practice of usury. In view of this explicit and unequivocal condemnation of the practice of usury, there is no wonder that Isa al-Masih ibn Maryam alayhi salam, or Jesus Christ, as recorded in all the four canonical Gospels, audaciously turned upside down the money changers' table in the Temple of Solomon. Take note, all the four canonical Gospels reported this incident. A common interpretation is that Jesus was reacting to the practice of money changers routinely cheating the people. But another observation is that a good deal of money was stored in the temple where it could be loaned by the wealthy to the poor who were in danger of losing their land to debt. The temple establishment, therefore, cooperated with the aristocracy in the exploitation of the poor. So related to this, there's no wonder that one of the first acts of the first Jewish-Roman war was the burning of the debt records in the archives. Now, let's go to the Quranic passages. If we try to scan the pages of the Quran, there are actually 4 key passages consisting of 8 verses explicitly addressing usury or riba. One is in Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verses 275 to 279, which is actually a set of multiple verses that strongly condemn usury and warn believers against it. In Surah Ali Imran, chapter 3, verse 130, it advises against consuming compounded usury. In Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 161, the verse refers to the wrongdoing of those who practice usury, connecting it to historical misconduct. In Surah Ar-Rum, chapter 30, verse 39, it discusses the difference between giving for interest and giving for charity or sadaqah. And with these 4 key passages, let me emphasize that in the first passage, that is in Surah Al-Baqarah, especially in the last verse, that is verse 279, practicing riba is tantamount to waging war against Allah and His Messenger. Biharbin min Allahi wa Rasulih. Now, my question is there a stronger word than this one? That a certain act is tantamount to waging war against Allah and His Messenger. Now, let us proceed to the next point that I would like to discuss: the market potentials. Let us first take a look at the global market. Of course, I will not dwell on this because more or less we have idea on what is going on. But I will just mention these trends in passing. As of 2023, the global Islamic finance market is valued at over 2.88 trillion and is expected to grow to 3.69 trillion by 2026, with an annual growth rate of about 10%. The market includes Islamic banking, sukuk or Islamic bonds, takaful or Islamic insurance, and Islamic funds. How about our regional market in Southeast Asia? Cross-border collaborations and harmonization of standards among Southeast Asian nations can facilitate growth. For example, ASEAN initiatives for financial integration might provide platforms for Islamic finance expansion. And of course, fintech and digital banking are expected to play a significant role, as GCash is playing, especially in reaching undeserved populations. Now, how about the Philippine market? Among the recent developments are the following. In recent years, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, or BSP, has taken steps to develop Islamic finance. For example, it issued regulations for the establishment of Islamic banks and the operations of Islamic banking units by conventional banks. And of course, last year, it also opened the door for sukuk or Islamic bonds. The Philippine Islamic Finance Coordination Forum, or PIFC, has been set up to create a more supportive environment for growth. How about potential growth areas in our national market? One is on banking and microfinance. Given the large unbanked Muslim population, especially here in Mindanao, expanding Islamic microfinance services can drive financial inclusion and development in undeserved regions like Mindanao. Another is sukuk. The issuance of sukuk or Islamic bonds to finance infrastructure projects in Muslim majority areas is another opportunity. And this could attract investment from other Islamic finance hubs in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. And just last year, it was really proven when the door for sukuk was opened in the Philippines. Another area is takaful. With limited penetration of takaful or Islamic insurance in the Philippines, there is a potential market, very promising market for developing products tailored to the local Muslim community. So in conclusion, first is about ethical finance. We have learned in the highlights that we have given that the prohibition of usury is actually across the board, meaning across religious scriptures. And the second one is that when we talk about Islamic finance, it's actually for both Muslims and non-Muslims. In this first point of the conclusion, that Islamic finance is ethical finance if you are a provider or a consumer. You will realize that this one is not only for Muslims. If you want to practice and adhere to ethical finance, and then ahlan wa sahlan, welcome. And the same also when you are a non-Muslim consumer of those products and services which are Sharia compliant or within the framework, the Islamic financial framework. So the thing that we would like to drive at here is that aside from the profit, aside from the gain that we could have, you service provider or product provider like GCash and you consumer in Islamic finance, when you practice it, you are actually practicing ethical financing. So that is one motivation. Of course, the second motivation is the one that is very obvious for us. That is the financial profit that we could have. It is very interesting. It is actually a realization for me, a personal realization. In one training that I had attended, in the Q&A, a lady lawyer, Muslim lawyer, asked about Islamic finance because in the said seminar, one of the topics was Islamic finance. And the question was framed in such a way, at least the way that I understood it, in that when we say Islamic finance, it is just identical to Qardul Hasan, or what we call as good loan, meaning loan, you just lend your money to another person and that's it. If ever you have spiritual reward, that is the one that you would get. So this one shows us that there is really a need for awareness and education, that when we say Islamic finance, it is not just limited to Qardul Hasan or good loan or interest-free loan or non-profit loan. In fact, in Islamic finance, there is so much gain. You can the profit, the potential profit is limitless. The only point is that the profit must be shared by both parties. It's not fair, or it is not allowed for just only one party to profit and the other one is at the losing end. So the realization here that we should have is that both the product service provider and the product service consumer could potentially profit when we practice Islamic finance. The third one is that in view of the first 2 points, that Islamic finance should be framed, should be projected to the public, not just a religious practice or associated with one religion. Let us project Islamic finance as ethical finance. And the other one is that Islamic finance is potentially profitable not only to the provider but also to the consumer. So because of that, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of marketing. You see, when there is a popular book, we call it bestseller, meaning the book that sells many copies. It does not say that the book has a quality content. So it means to say, when we say bestseller, it is the book that is successfully marketed. So marketing is very important apart from producing quality product or service. So along this marketing, we need to address both spectrum, the supply spectrum and the demand spectrum. In the supply spectrum, we need to convince product and service providers or Islamic finance product and service providers to realize that there is profit in Islamic finance. And on the demand side, let us make the Muslims and non-Muslims aware of the importance of Islamic finance. For the Muslims, there is nothing that we could convey other than the fact that practice of usury is tantamount to waging war against Allah and His Messenger. So in the areas of marketing, among the things that we try to contribute, although in very small ways, is through personal financial literacy, or I would say Islamic personal financial literacy. So along this line, we have actually published books such as A Muslim Couple and Money, 8 Practical Financial Tips for Newlywed Muslim Couple, Muslim and Debt, 5 Practical Steps to Freedom from Debt, 12 Financial Stories for Muslim Kids. We have also published How to Sharia Compliantly Invest in the Philippine Stock Market, Beginner's Step-by-Step Guide. We have also published Financial Literacy for Muslim Teens, 12 Short Stories of Empowerment. And in addition to authorship, we have also translated books on Islamic finance, such as this one, Banking and Insurance in Islam. Actually, I have prepared a list of Islamic financial products or services that GCash can actually offer, but because of time constraint, I cannot go over this list. Maybe in the Q&A session, we can deal with them. So with that, I would like to say once again, I thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.